Welcome to the Transformative Pursuit with Dr. Christopher Cohn. We're glad you have joined us and pray the content will be helpful and encouraging. The pursuit starts now.
Hello and welcome to the Transformative Pursuit. This is Season 2, Episode 3. The question we're asking today is, how do we know that God exists? Think about his fingerprints in everything. Imagine a magnifying glass looking for prints or dusting for prints, and you're looking for evidence that a person has been in the room. Well, is there any such evidence? Can we claim that God exists and it be any sort of rational claim at all? That's the question we're thinking through. Well, today's episode of the Transformative Pursuit is brought to you by Central Bible Fellowship, centralbiblefellowship.org, an online fellowship and conversation centered on the verse-by-verse teaching of the Scriptures. Join our interactive online Bible studies, participate, comment, get your questions answered in real time, Sundays at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, centralbiblefellowship.org. And remember, the topics for Season 2 are from your questions. Send your questions by email to ccone@drcone.com, ccone@drcone.com, with the subject line TTP question. And I would love to have your questions, topics, thoughts, comments as part of our Season 2 lineup. Or you can message me on X @drcone, @drcone. I'd love to hear from you. Well, how do we know that God exists? That's our question for today. How do we know that God exists? There are a few different things to consider. There are multiple evidences, multiple streams of thought that we could take, and I want to just highlight a few of these for you today. First of all, let's talk about something that is often called or referred to as the transcendental idea. Now, that is a strange way to say it's something that transcends provability or proof. It transcends any need for external evidence. In other words, it's a self-justifying principle. So, for example, some of the philosophers like Descartes would say that his own existence is a transcendental concept because he can ask a question so he knows he exists. Okay, so that's how René Descartes deals with it. Say Immanuel Kant would say that the world, human beings, humanity, and God are transcendental realities. They exist. There's just no question that they exist and no need for external evidence. Well, I'm a biblicist, so I prefer to find biblical answers. And so let's see, is the transcendental idea present in Scripture? Well, let's look at the words of Solomon, who is perhaps the greatest of the philosophers, right? And one who is speaking to us with the wisdom of God, because his wisdom is given him by God. But notice Proverbs 1 verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. What is Solomon doing here? Notice he doesn't first present in these opening verses to Proverbs an argument for the existence of God. He doesn't argue that God exists. He argues from God's existence, the fear of the Lord. And it's not God in general. It is this very specific person who he calls Yahweh. And as we look at all the Hebrew, the instances in the Hebrew Scriptures of the name Yahweh, we discover this is who we call the pre-incarnate Christ, or this is Jesus before he became a man. And so we'll see that this Yahweh is interacting with humanity, including with Solomon, if you recall. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Solomon begins with the idea that God exists and not deity in general. He's not a theist making a theistic argument. He is a follower of Yahweh, a believer in this one, and he acknowledges his existence, and he suggests that the fear of the Lord, which I would summarize by saying the fear of the Lord is the proper perspective of and response to God. Okay? The fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now, when we think about arguments for the existence of God, many of them begin by assessing knowledge and thinking through different paths of argument. Well, Solomon doesn't do that either. He doesn't argue to God or take steps to arrive at the existence of God and then say, therefore God exists. Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, premise 4, conclusion, therefore God exists. He does not do that. He begins with the existence of God, recognizing we have to begin with the proper perspective of God in order to have any knowledge at all, any pursuit of knowledge, any pursuit of rational use of proper appropriation of logic. It all requires the fear of the Lord. Now, obviously, people who don't have the fear of the Lord, they can have knowledge and they can use logic, right? How does that square with what Solomon is saying? Solomon is explaining that the worldview that begins with the fear of the Lord can have accurate knowledge, as he'll describe in the book of Proverbs, for example. And those who don't fear the Lord, they don't see the beginning of knowledge. They're going to get bits and pieces along the way, but they're going to miss, like if they find letters of the alphabet, they might find H, they might find X and Y, but they don't have all the letters, and so they can't put it together. So imagine trying to read a paragraph if you only had 3 letters. It would be very difficult. You just couldn't do it, right? Now, if you had 23 letters, you could do it. You've seen those paragraphs missing some letters, and you can still read them just fine. Solomon's point here isn't that we're going to know everything if we have the fear of the Lord, but we have the beginning which allows us to pursue knowledge correctly and arrive at the right answers. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and it's fools who despise wisdom and instruction. And you'll also remember someone that knew a little bit about Solomon wrote in Psalm 14 that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Right? Notice that the fool isn't determining by reasoning and logic and wisdom that there's no God, but they're determining in their heart. It's a matter of the human will to deny God. So atheism is not a logical conclusion. It is a predetermination of the will, according to these writers. And the fear of the Lord being the beginning of knowledge, how do we get the fear of the Lord? How do we arrive at this wondrous information, the right perspective, so that we can act on it? Well, Solomon says in Proverbs chapter 2, in verse 6, he identifies the source of that and gives us a very important piece of information. He says, "For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth knowledge and understanding." So God gives wisdom, knowledge, and understanding from what? His mouth. So God exists. This is the transcendental idea. God exists, and not just any God, but Yahweh, this God who's revealed in the Hebrew Scriptures. We call it the Old Testament. This is God. And he reveals that there's 2 other persons in this, what we call the Trinity, just how we describe this, right? And we later come to know of these 3 persons as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He exists, and he gives wisdom from his mouth. He gives knowledge and understanding. So not only does God exist, but he reveals himself and communicates to us through his word. And from his word, we get to understand wisdom, knowledge, and the concept of understanding, these important bases of worldview. So this is a really critical element, and it's our starting place. There are other arguments and ways to think about the existence of God, and we'll talk about those. But how do we know that God exists? Solomon knew that he exists because he was pre-existent, and the source of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding is from him. So in other words, we can't borrow his knowledge to arrive at a conclusion that he exists. in order to have the concept of knowledge itself, we must recognize that he exists. And in so doing, we can trace out these paths of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Well, it's a very interesting discussion, and you consider things like the nature of evidence. What kind of evidence is acceptable? Some might suggest, I'm a person of science, and so I don't believe that God exists because I can't use the scientific method to demonstrate his existence. So therefore, God doesn't exist. David Hume was a little bit along those lines. He believed that if you couldn't sense something, you couldn't validate its existence. But there are many things we can't sense that are realities. And just because we don't sense them or we can't experience them doesn't mean they're not realities. We see that concept that if we're using a methodology that's limited to try to demonstrate something beyond its scope or beyond its capacity, then we'll have failure. You can't use the scientific method to determine the reality of love or to determine the amount of love. This is not a material concept, right? God is not a material being. Now, you might argue, well, wait a minute, if Jesus was historical, then he was material. He certainly was. And by the way, the Yahweh of the Old Testament, we see interacting and eating with Abraham, talking, right? We see, of course, Jesus coming as a man and interacting very physically. So that's where we then do the scientific work. We look at the historical documents, and that gets where we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We'll look at the historical miracles and the testimony. My point is that we can apply the scientific method and deal with the material evidences, but when God at his core and in the essentiality, the essence of his being is a non-material being, then you're going to have a real problem if you're relying on a method that can only and is limited to testing in materialistic ways. So again, science and faith are not in opposition. They're just dealing with different things. And when I say science, I'm talking about the scientific method. Of course, you may know that the word science is from the Latin word that just means knowledge, right? And not all knowledge is gained in the same way. That's my point here. We can't know that Jesus exists or that God exists the same way we can know that you have a car in your garage. You would go into your garage and look at the car and say, okay, I can sense with my eyes there's a car there. I can put my hands on the car. I can sit in the car. I can push the ignition button or turn the key and hear the car, right? So I can interact with the car in these various sensory ways. I can look out my window if I don't have a garage and I can see the car, right? If I don't have a car, I can look at my next door neighbor's car and I can see, they have a car. I can sense these things, right? I can't prove the existence of God in the same way that I prove the existence of or the presence of a car. They're not the same things. One is material, one is not. And so often in the arguments against the existence of God, we don't consider, and those who are arguing against God don't consider the non-material essence of God. As Jesus says, our Father in heaven is spirit, and we'll worship him in spirit and truth. So the transcendental idea just means that there are some things that are beyond provability. They are self-justifying realities. And as we have faith in the existence of God, and we have faith in God, the question is that faith warranted? Is it legitimate? Is the object of the faith worth our faith? Well, Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, seemed to think so, because he told us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and that God gives us that from his mouth, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. So enjoy the pursuit of God this week as you study and gain wisdom, knowledge, and understanding from him. God bless you. See you next time.